Today, I bring you a story that happened on the island of Cuba many years ago. This story was told to me by my grandfather's brother. This is the story of Carmela, an elderly lady who lived alone with her two cats. Her children were already married men with children and lived in the city. Although her children insisted on taking her to live with them, she always refused. "This is my home. From here I only leave in a casket." Carmela's house was the last house in the village. She was born and raised in that house. That house had been built by her parents. Carmela was the town's seamstress. They said that when he was young, a lot of people went to her house to seek her services. She was the seamstress of actresses, the wives of politicians, and other celebrities. Over the years, she lost his sight and her designs went out of fashion. After losing all that illustrious clientele, she only dedicated herself to making cushions, to make hems of work pants of some of the neighbors who brought it to her so that she was entertained. She did it simply for entertainment. She was able to save money from the time in which business was very prosperous. Sometimes she sewed late into the night, always accompanied by her trusty Motorola radio, which was as old as she was. Carmela's machine had a peculiar sound. It was a pedal machine, one of the old ones. To her, electric machines were nonsense, as she said. "The best sewing machine pedals singer, the rest is fret." On the pedal machine you control everything. You put part of your soul in each piece you make, and it is also very good exercise for circulation. These were the excuses she used every time one of her sons told her he wanted to buy her a new machine. From time to time, some of the neighbors went to Carmela's house to have a coffee, to talk for a while, and to share some neighborhood gossip. Carmela did not leave the house. The same friends often did her the favor of doing her any errand she needed. Carmela's children came every weekend religiously and brought her everything she might need. In the last weeks of October, a major hurricane was announced, a very powerful one. Carmela's children came looking for her, but she refused to leave, so the children were forced to reinforce the windows and doors so that the hurricane would not damage the house. Carmela kept listening to the radio and heard as the powerful hurricane approached. According to the forecast of meteorologists, her village was in the path of the meteorological phenomenon. Carmela decided to keep sewing while the storm passed. The damage was considerable in the town, but Carmela's house remained intact. Carmela's children phoned one of the neighbors to get information on their mother's well-being, as they couldn't get to the house. Unfortunately, the village had been left incommunicado. There were trees, power poles blocking the entrance access to the town. The neighbor went to Carmela's house to make sure she was okay. He knocked on the door, but she did not answer. The neighbor could perfectly hear the sewing machine in the silence of the night. He thought of insisting on the door, but then he realized that it would be worse to make Carmela come to the door. She could have fell because it was dark. The neighbor returned to the house and called back one of Carmela's sons. "Everything is fine. I didn't see her, but I heard the sewing machine. I didn't want to insist so she didn't have to come to answer the door because it's dark, there's no electricity, and I don't want her to fall." She was very lucky because the house is intact. Nothing happened to her. The children were calmer and would wait for the tracks to be cleared so they could visit her. Every night the neighbors heard the sewing machines and the music on the radio. They commented among themselves how good it was that Carmela had a battery radio. If not, she would go crazy there alone and without electricity. On the third day, the electricity was finally restored and the roads were cleared, so Carmela's children went to see her. The moment they stood at the door, they knew something was not right. The cats ran out of the house like two bullets when they opened the door. A foul smell also came out of the house. The children came calling her out. Everything was dark. There was a sepulchral silence, and when they reached the sewing room, there was Carmela, dead, lying on her faithful sewing machine. They called an ambulance immediately. Even though they knew she was no longer alive, they wanted to make sure. When the paramedics arrived, declared Carmela officially dead. Because of the state in which the body was, they determined that she had been dead for at least 3 days. With the excitement came the neighbors, and came the neighbor who had gone to check on Carmela the day the children called. He exclaimed incredulously, "I cannot believe this. How can this be? I came every day, and every day I listened to the radio and the sewing machine." "The battery radio you brought her," referring to the children. "No, we have not brought her any radio." "Well, the radio was on every day," replied the neighbor. "Is impossible, there is no electricity, and when we entered the house we heard nothing." The house was empty for several months, as the children did not want to get rid of the house. They knew how important it was to their mother when she was. Months later, the father-in-law of Carmela's neighbor died, and they decided to hold the wake at the neighbor's house, because the father-in-law lived on a farm a little away from the town. The house was full of people in the early hours of the night. It was tradition in those regions to have a funeral for the deceased person 24 hours immediately after death. As the night progressed, many people began to leave, and only those closest to the family stayed. Some stayed in the living room where the deceased was laid, others went out to the porch to talk, get some fresh air, or to smoke a cigarette. Carmela's neighbor came and went, bringing coffee and chatting with funeral attendees. After all, he was the host. About 1 o'clock in the morning, when they were handing out a round of coffee, they heard music coming from Carmela's house. Everyone looked at each other and turned their gaze to Carmela's house. Everyone could see that the light in the sewing room was on. Several of the men accompanied the neighbor and went to Carmela's house, because Carmela's sons had commissioned him to take care of the house and to take care of any kind of situation that could happen in the house. The neighbor knew perfectly well that the house was alone. When they approached the front door, the radio and the sewing machine could be heard clearly. That sound of the metal gears of the machine produced a chill in their bodies. That house was empty. Everyone was intrigued to see who was inside, but at the same time, they were a little scared. The neighbors saw the frightened faces of those who accompanied him and told them maybe they are some of the boys from the town who entered the house to play. But once the key entered the lock, everything fell silent again. When the front door opened, everything was dark and there was no sound. One of those who accompanied him stayed at the door in case the boys tried to escape, and the others accompanied to check every inch of the house, but found nothing. The house was empty, no one came out the front door. The windows were closed, some still had the protections that Carmela's children had put in place to protect her from the hurricane. Everyone looked at each other and left the house, commenting that it probably an electrical issue with the radio. They knew perfectly well that something was not right, but they did not dare to say what they really believed. They returned to the wake and did not speak about it again. For several days the neighbor did not hear or see anything in Carmela's house. But after 13 days a noise woke him up. There was loud music and again that chilling sound of the sewing machine. The neighbor leaned out of his dining room window, which looked directly into Carmela's sewing room. The light was on. He grabbed Carmela's keys and a machete and went to check. Again, as soon as the key entered the lock, everything fell silent. He was a countryman who did not believe in ghosts or apparitions. But that was making her uncomfortable. If it was an electrical short radio, it was better to disconnect the electricity of the house, so if he disconnect the fuses of the house, everything should be fixed. He thought about alerting Carmela's children. But he didn't want them to think he was crazy or afraid. Turning off the electricity should fix the problem if it was an electrical problem. So he closed the house again and went to sleep. The next night, again the music and the sound of the machine. This time the neighbor was a little nervous. Once again, when the key entered the lock, everything stopped, but when he opened the front door, a shadow passed from the sewing room to the room where Carmela slept. That was not a person, or at least not a living one. In the midst of nerves, he managed to reconnect the electricity and turn on the lights. He searched the whole house with machete in hand. But again, The house was empty, so he left the house in a bit of a hurry, and when he was about to leave, he clearly felt that a hand touched his back. He ran out of the house. He felt as if his soul had left his body, his pupils dilated, and he felt all the blood flow down his feet. He ran like he had never ran before for his house. The next day he called Carmela's children and told them he was sorry, but that he could no longer take responsibility for taking care of the house. They said they were sorry. "We know we have abused your generosity. We are going to compensate you for all this time. The issue is that my brother hasn't decided to sell the house. But we have already found some people who want to rent it." The neighbor didn't want to say anything so that he wouldn't think again that he was crazy or that he was scared, and just said goodbye kindly. A week later, a family of 3 moved into the house. They didn't have many possessions, just some clothes. They were distant relatives of Carmela who were going through a difficult financial situation. The couple had a girl of about 4 years old. The neighbor and his wife went to welcome them to the village and to offer their help in case they needed. The new guy told the neighbor that he was looking for a job, no matter what it was. The neighbor had inherited the farm from the father-in-law and told the new neighbor that he would need manpower, so he would offer him a job. The boy was happy to have gotten a job. The first few days everything was quiet, but on the 3rd day the girl's screams of terror woke up her parents and neighbors. They immediately looked out the window at Carmela's sewing room that now was the girl's room. The neighbor thought about going, but he didn't want them to think he was nosy. The next day the new guy was at the neighbor's house very early, ready to go to work on the farm. When they were on their way, the guy told Carmela's neighbor that the girl had spent the night crying and afraid. She said that there was a lady in her room and did not let her sleep. The neighbor did not want to scare him with his experience, but advised him to take the girl to sleep in his room, at least for a few days, so that the girl would acclimatize to the house. While the girl slept in the parents' room, things were quiet. But when the girl returned to sleep in the sewing room, the strange episodes returned. Every night at 3 o'clock in the morning the Motorola radio was turned on at full volume and the sewing machine could be heard in conjunction with the terrifying screams of the girl. Those events were increasing to the point that the wife began to see a shadow that went from floor sewing to the room where they slept. The girl's room was cold as ice, although they were in the middle of summer. The girl constantly repeated, "The old lady does not want us here. She says that this is her house." They say that they brought someone to the house who understood those things and said that the couple had to get rid of all the things of the previous owner. Cups, photos, everything that anchored her to that house. The spirit was furious because they were in her house and someone was occupying her beloved sewing room. They cleaned the house with some herbs, prayed, and even brought the village's priest to bless the house. Everything calmed down for a few days, but then the noises and nightmares of the girl returned. The neighbor was moved by that situation and offered them to move to the house of the farm, the house that had belonged to his father-in-law. This way they would take care of the farm and the house where she would be alone. They gladly accepted and left the house. Soon Carmela's house took the reputation of haunted and cursed. For many years Carmela was heard sewing on that machine and listening to her beloved Motorola from beyond. I hope you liked this story. If you did, please leave us a like, and if you have not done so yet, please subscribe. I also invite you to activate the bell icon so that you receive notifications every time we publish new content. Thank you.